The conversation you are about to hear was recorded in 2020 during the height of the global pandemic. And now, Global Comedy Studios presents, Is This a Bad Time to Talk?
All right, I'm about to call Eddie Brill. It is December 2nd, 2020. Eddie has been doing stand-up for a long time. He is so well known in the New York comedy community. He was a warm-up comic for Letterman for 17 years, and very lucky to be chatting with him for a little bit for an insight into the comedy world and what he's up to. Let me just go here on this app that I'm using. Hello? Hello, is this Eddie Brill?
And this is he.
This is Ali. Is this a bad time to talk?
Nope, it's the perfect time to talk.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you so much for doing this. It's December 2nd, 2020. I'm in New York City on 53rd. Where am I finding you right now? I'm
in the East Village downtown. You know, there's a lot of twos in this date, right? It's the 12th, the 2nd, 2020. I wonder what that means.
You know, it's funny. I was thinking that tonight when I was looking at that because I don't want to say I'm into numerology, but I do love sequences of numbers and cool numbers. And I don't know, it always just gives me a little bit of a wake-up call of like, okay, take a deep breath. Every time like I see 222 or 111 by accident, right, when I look at the digital clock, I'm like, am I where I should be?
For me, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. I see that a lot. I have 12:34 p.m., 12:34 a.m. I see it a lot. You know, I know friends of mine who see that 222, 111, those things. I was working for years with the Johnny Carson Comedy Festival, the Great American Comedy Festival, and when I got there, Johnny had built this theater, and I asked them how many seats there were, and they said 1, 2, 3, 4. There was 1,234 seats. It just, that number comes up a lot in my life. Now, I'm not into numerology per se, but I think it's fascinating, and I know there's a man I met in my life named Victoris Kulvinskas, who's one of these otherworldly wizard, incredible human beings, and he's very much into numerology. So knowing how much I respect him for everything else he does in his life, I'm sure there's something to this numerology.
Well, I mean, 1234 is actually, I have a series of numbers that, like, and it usually happens when I look at a digital clock where I look down at my watch and I see those numbers. And long ago, I just, learned that essentially, since the advent of the digital clock, is a way to it's a wake-up call. Just take a deep breath. Where am I? Am I on the path? Am I on the wrong path? And it's interesting because, just you and I talking is amazing to me because, I've known of you since the 80s because I think I mentioned in an email that I happened to come to New York to visit a friend. We went to the Comedy Cellar, and you were one of the comics, and you were doing the bit with Fast as a Bunny,
Right,
yeah. Remember that bit? And I just thought, wow, this is New York City, and it's the Comedy Cellar. And then one of my former students, Joe, asked me if he could interview me for this paper he's writing, and he showed me the paper, and I was like, Eddie Brill, you interviewed him too? And he's like, yeah. I was like, well, I'd love to talk to him. And he was like, sure, I'll set it up. And you were like right back at you. What days work? I can do it this and this. And, so, you're somebody that I think everybody in the world of New York comedy knows Eddie Brill, and, all you've done. But I don't know if they know, like, even when I was doing a little bit of research, there were things that I didn't even know, like, and we'll talk about it and stuff, but the comedy theater you opened up, the Paper Moon, all those little things along the way. Did you always know you wanted to be, part of comedy, and were you always funny? What are the earliest memories of, like, knowing, like, oh, I can make people laugh, or I'm around funny people?
Well, I never thought of it as a career. I loved comedy. My parents loved comedy, and we had a lot of comedy albums in the house, and, we'd watch a lot of comedy shows, and, my parents would go to see stand-up a lot, like Buddy Hackett and Don Rickles and stuff like that. My parents were very funny. My mom was hilarious. My dad was very funny as well. But my mom was really the funniest person in the world, and we were closest of everyone in the family. And so we, it was really fun when I could make her laugh. And also, I was a chubby kid, to say the least. And, in order to, I was good in sports despite my heft, which really helps. When you're growing up, you're going to get grief from your friends, for having a weird last name, or, whatever, that you're fat, or, whatever, because kids are cruel, and, that's the way people are. But, there are ways to get around it. And for me, one of them was being great at sports, and the other way was being funny. So the fact that I was funny made me, more accepted, as opposed to just being, like the fat nerd I was growing up. I had some other qualities that helped me. I remember going to camp for the first time, sleepaway camp, the first and only time. I didn't really enjoy it for many reasons, but one of the things that sort of saved me from just completely being devastated was the fact that I made some people laugh, and I loved the way that made me feel.
Wow, so many similarities, because my mom's also funny. I was also heavy. I also happen to be able to throw and catch pretty well. And I guess you learn to either make people laugh or fight. And that for me was, I just somehow, whatever it was, going through different types of comedy, found that was kind of a tool to endear yourself to people.
Yeah, and I mean, words can be much more powerful than punches. It takes more skill to be able to use language, verbal and nonverbal skills, than it is to just be, some insecure person who uses a punch to get their point across. Although it is effective.
Yeah, but I think and I mean, you're such a wordsmith in everything you do, and growing up, were there school plays or teachers along the way who encouraged you?
There were a lot of incredible teachers along the way. My best teacher had nothing to do with comedy. She was a broadcast journalism teacher, and she taught me a lot about life, and and I love words since I'm a little kid. So, you're using words in broadcast, in journalism, and she was just an incredible facilitator and great teacher. So I would say she was the most inspirational teacher along the way, but also had great music teachers along the way. And music is very mathematical, and so is the use of language is very mathematical. So, that combination along the way, was very helpful. When I was a little boy, I was always playing with words, and I always loved them. I was able to read when I was very young, I think 2 or 3. My parents, I kind of shocked them by being able to read, and learned how to spell a couple of words. And it was I was just a freak, I guess, in some weird way. And I remember making little index cards with funny pictures, just puns, playing, I would put, a knife and a battery, and a salt and it was a salt shaker and a battery, be a salt and battery. And then there was when you take those funny names like Bill, Ding, would be those kind of, and very sophomoric, but that's when I was little. To me, that was the funniest thing on the planet. It was Count Dracula and all that kind of stuff, and I thought, it'd be funny to have one named Count Your Change or Count Your Blessings. It's there was always that kind of stuff is always dancing around in my head. It's been since I'm a young boy, all the way until now. There's always words dancing around in my head. So, long way around to answer your question. There are people that have influenced me in my life, as far as being great facilitators, and but really I was a sort of a student of my own game. Until I did this by myself often. And then I saw George Carlin on television, and I went, "Oh my God, wow! Ding, ding, ding! This person is making a career out of doing what I do, sitting around at home."
And about how old were you when you saw Carlin for the first time on TV like that?
I don't remember. I don't remember how old I was. I remember seeing him in different categories of his life, where he was more conservative, straight-laced comic on different programs. and and then he was a part of a comedy team, and I saw him there. And then I remember seeing him on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, early on, and he was just, the more and more I saw him, the more and more, I just fell in love with him because, it was the style, the use of his brain power, the silliness. It was, it's like I had met a friend, and that person was making a lot of people laugh and making a career out of doing what I love, goofing off at home.
I've been listening to a lot of Carlin lately, just on YouTube and watching him. And it's funny when you don't for a while, you just go back and are reminded of like, yeah, this guy was funny, but what he was saying was so truthful. He was willing to just tell you the truth, and then knew he'd get a laugh at the end, and a little bit of sugar made the medicine go down.
Yeah, exactly.
And so in high school, you are watching comedy, you're seeing it, and I read that you grew up in Florida but were born in New York. So
Right.
This was all happening down in Florida.
Yeah, I moved to Florida for the 7th grade, just before I started the 7th grade. So, it was very different because New York was a little more open-minded and Florida was completely the opposite. Again, I just found myself finding a couple of friends that were more, more forward-thinking, more progressive, and I found a lot of racism and sort of, closed-mindedness when I first moved to Florida. It was kind of shocking, and it took me a while to, find some people that I could relate to, and so that early experience in Florida was a little tough. But then once I met some good people, you don't need 1,000 million friends. You just need a couple that you can trust and that you can, share ideas with and be playful and have fun. But, so yeah. Plus, what's interesting about my life in high school was my stepfather, who was an amazing man. He got cancer. He died. He was just turned 38 years old, and I was the oldest of 5. So all of a sudden, I'm in charge of a family. I'm 15 years old, and I'm, raising kids and changing diapers and taking kids to school and going to work myself. And, so all of a sudden there was this, I wasn't really able to be a kid. I had to be an adult when I was a kid. So in order to get through the craziness, comedy, laughter, watching funny shows like Mr. Ed, or, the Ed Sullivan Show, or, seeing comedy on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Those are the things that saved me during a very dark period of my life.
It's interesting, and we'll get to this later, but to be able to have something like the Ed Sullivan Show be something in your life, and Carson, and then eventually to be able to perform at the Ed Sullivan Theater for as long as you did. To me, it's those amazing little moments, and that's why, I love talking to people to hear these bifurcation points that in that moment, because, I loved Carson too, and my parents let me stay up and watch it with them. And even when I go home to visit my folks, when I go into the room, before going to bed, they're watching Carson. And so I sit there and I watch reruns of Carson with them. And it's similar. Like I tell my daughters, because they get caught up about popularity and friends, and I said, look, you need 1 or 2 friends. That's it. And if you have those, and because for me, 7th grade was also the time when the hostage crisis happened. So I was a 7th grader. I was from Iran. I was in North Carolina, and then I got a sense of how things change in a day. But I guess everybody's funny comes from someplace, where all of a sudden that crucible begins to develop your perspective.
Yeah, I could, definitely could see that. I mean, it comes from, comedy is mostly derived out of conflict. So there's when you live a life that's full of conflict and full of, twists and turns, and most people have that. And if most people don't have it as bad as I did, quote unquote bad, they create that. People like drama. That's why soap operas are very popular, because people love drama and they love to create it. Same thing with sports, like baseball and stuff. There's a drama to that is real and live that, that goes on. So people love to create drama. And So, the tool to be able to get past all of the drama is comedy. And that makes, being silly is more fun. Like, when life is hard, watch Monty Python. When life is hard, listen to, Richard Pryor. When, those are the things for me that, out of the conflicts, come the comedy. And even when you're having, rough times, there's always a place you can go to, whether it be on television, whether it be an album, or whether it's in your head or in your gut, where you can find the comedy.
It's funny, today, Pryor would have been 80 years old today.
Yeah.
And I was watching one of the very early 1971 Smokin', a concert tape he did, but very low production value. And you realize he was just trying stuff. He was not getting a lot of laughs, but he was still powering through, trying to find his voice in front of an audience. I don't know why. I guess this past week I started watching Carlin and Pryor and Hicks again.
No, a friend of mine, Felicia Michaels, who's a great comedian from L.A., wrote a really nice piece about growing up loving Pryor and then eventually watching him work out at the store, and like Comedy Store, and bombing, and at the beginning, and not caring that he was bombing, and then come back each night and adding to what he had started with, until by the end of the week, all the material now was killing and the audience was going crazy because he was brave enough to, try stuff out, even if it didn't work, and didn't fall, to the sort of thing where he would only be doing stuff that the audience would think he's great at, but really working the material out from just ideas. And it really influenced her to realize that, you can play and you can have a great time. And if the audience doesn't like what you're doing, you just power through and do all right. I remember one time at the Comedy Store, late 80s, 88, 87, I was handed a note while I was on stage: when you're done, bring up Richard Pryor. And I was like, oh my God, I could hardly breathe. And I sort of finished up the joke I was doing, and then I brought him up, and the crowd went nuts. And at first they didn't believe that. They thought I was lying, And as he moved through the crowd, you can hear the crowd just picking up their cheering and enthusiasm. He got to the stage. I handed him the mic, and he said, "Nice job, kid. I'm set for life." You know what I mean? And then he went on stage and was Richard Pryor and was funny, and all the comics lined up the back wall, and we just watched him be amazing.
Wow. And, seeing someone like that in person, is there a way to quantify, when I tell people, I like to say, it comes down to two things: what you say and how you say it. The what you say is the writing. How you say it is your voice and style. But seeing him in a room like that, was there just something otherworldly?
I think it was the fact that he, he was very soulful, and he just, he told his truth, and he told it through a mixture of his ideas and also through characters. And, the nonverbal communication that he did was as powerful, or maybe even more powerful, than some of the words. And so the combination of the two really make a difference. A lot of people don't realize that nonverbal communication is one of the biggest and most important skills, because we all think word, and, I can write, funny words where you see them on paper, and, they have a sort of rhythm and they work. But there's, when you're on stage, there's a nonverbal. There's the biggest, Jack Benny got his biggest laughs with pauses. And so to watch Pryor and his movement and his expressions and his total dedication to the craft, you just knew that this was a special human being that, really got it. It's like when, I watch Chappelle nowadays. I think there's no better comic who uses both, the combination of his own truth and not trying to please everybody. That's the perfect combination to be a successful comedian.
And were you also able to meet Carlin at any point in your life?
Yeah, well, that I became very close to George Carlin, which was the thrill of my life. And, we got to hang out and talk, and he called me to teach his girlfriend Sally stand-up and how to become a stand-up. And I was like, "But you're George Carlin." He goes, "Well, I'm her boyfriend. She's not going to listen to me." And, he had said he had heard I was a very good teacher, which of course is a thrill. But one of the biggest, there's a few George Carlin and me stories. The first time I met him, I was in Las Vegas and he was at a slot machine, and I went up to him to tell him that I had written a joke and I did it on television, and somebody told me that it was a George Carlin joke that they had heard. And I was freaking out because, I knew everything he did, and I didn't hear him do that joke, and I created it myself, I know, but I stopped using it because I didn't want anyone to think I was stealing. So I told him that story. He says, well, two things. One is I didn't write that joke. Someone sold it to me, and I loved it. And two, can I shake your hand? I want to shake the hand of the guy who wrote that incredible joke. So, of course, it's like the most incredible thing you can hear from your hero. And then, I started to know him, and we ran into each other. And then I was doing this in the early 2000s. I was doing a show in Las Vegas with a bunch of different comics, old and new, like, older people like, Norm Crosby and, that kind of thing, and younger comics as well. And George Carlin was at the show. He came to say hello. He was around that weekend. And he was sitting in the audience, and he was in a booth. And my friends were in the booth next to him. And they told me after the show, they said, his friends were talking to him while the show was going on, and he was kind of annoyed by it. And when I came out, he told his friends to shut up because I really like this guy, and I want to hear what he has to say. So again, if there's anything you can dream about happening, those are the scenarios. I mean, he had his assistant call the Letterman show and ask who that comic was on TV because he really liked him and wanted to know him. So eventually I became close to George. I'm very close to Sally, of course, because I met her, and she's great. And Kelly Carlin is one of my best friends, his daughter. So, it's very surreal that there's some people that either my parents worshipped or that I, just learned so much from, or was, just thrilled by, who became friends of mine in this life, and my father didn't really want me to do stand-up. He thought it wasn't a career. And, his hero was Don Rickles, and one night on the Letterman show, Don Rickles had said beautiful things about me on TV, and it made my father's whole world. He was like, he told me he broke down in tears. He said, wow, I'm glad you chose what you chose, because obviously you're good at what you do and you get the respect of the people that I respect. And it really, another incredible moment, signpost in my life where I got my father, who was a great guy, but he was, not convinced that I was going to be successful at what I did, instead of being in his sort of business, as fathers want for their sons. But I have dreamed my dream, and as opposed to living his dream, and it worked out the best possible scenario.
Those are some magical moments. I mean, wow. I mean, and this is the kind of stuff that I didn't know, because you wouldn't find this in any kind of like Wikipedia stuff. That's amazing. That's amazing. And what about Carson? Did you ever come across Carson?
Well, here's the thing. I worked as the warm-up for the show Saved by the Bell, which was literally 4 feet across the hall from The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And so I was over there at that set all the time, and I saw him in the hallway a couple of times, but I never met him ever, which is a shame that happened. And then I met the booker of the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson after Johnny had left, and the booker said, "Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't see you enough. I didn't see you before when we were doing the show, because Johnny would have loved you." And it's like, oh, well, the guy could have been making that up, he could have just said that. I don't know how true that is, but heartbreaking to hear it. And then, so I never had met Johnny, and then he passed away. But I knew that he was very close to Dave Letterman, and I worked at the Letterman show. And so an opportunity came for me somebody from Nebraska called me up and asked me they were going to start this amateur comedy festival where they're going to get like 60 amateurs to come compete for a trophy, best amateur Johnny Carson thing. And would I teach a workshop during it? And I met them, and said, yes, I would do that. And then I realized that, this was not going to work, and it wasn't going to be as, equal to the task, equal to the glory that's Johnny Carson. So I asked them to let me create the festival, at least the creative part of it. And so I came up with a blueprint for the Great American Comedy Festival and ran it for 10 years. In Johnny's hometown, I know his family, and it's pretty crazy. It's pretty amazing. Unfortunately, though, I had never said, "Hi, my name's Eddie. Nice to meet you. You're my hero," or any of that. Or I never got to meet him as a comedian on the show, or sit at the desk, or any of those kind of things. So it's one thing, I don't regret, but I wish, I have a feeling it could have happened in the right scenario, but it didn't. So I have to live knowing I got to do this incredible honor for him, and his family appreciated it.
Well, I mean, I completely believe what that man told you about Johnny. There's no reason not to believe it's true. To me, I'd like to. Why not believe? I mean, a lot of this is just almost sounds like the movie "It's a Wonderful Life," but you've gotten a chance to actually have these moments that they're filmic. Cinema Paradiso like of just,
which is my of all time.
Yeah, the closest I ever got to Carlin was that we went to the same place where there was a float tank, and I thought maybe he might have floated in the same water as me. So I just want to jump back to, the high school and then how you decide to go to Emerson up in Boston.
Sure. I was a math and science whiz in high school, and I was, had looked at MIT and schools like that. I had the grades. I was very poor, and we didn't have much money at all, and there were chances that I could have got scholarships and grants and from the government, and so I was thinking that way. And then my stepfather died, and I said, you know what, life is too short. I don't know if I want to have a life of math and science. I had done some broadcasting at the high school. I went to South Broward High School in Broward County, Hollywood, Florida, and I had done a character at the basketball and football games because I had a Howard Cosell impression kind of down. So I called myself Broward Cosell, and it was really fun to get that, my picture in the paper, and it's a sort of performance, live performance in front of, hundreds and hundreds of people. And I really liked that. Then I started writing for the local Hollywood Sun-Tatler newspaper, and I enjoyed doing the writing and seeing my name in the byline, and I was getting a real thrill doing those kind of things. And I thought, my stepfather died. He was just turned 38. He didn't really get to live a long life. Well, I'm going to do what I love while I'm alive. Who knows if I'm going to make it to 18, or who knows if I'm going to make it to 38. You never know. So I changed I was staying at a friend's house, and I was looking at brochures because we were both looking for colleges, and he had this Emerson College brochure, and I called my uncle, who was a professor at University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and I talked to him about Emerson, and he said that it was a very good school. He said they had less than 2,000 students, and you could get the kind of, it's the fifth largest market in the United States as far as, radio, television. So you can get incredible experience doing this kind of stuff in a top market. And, Boston's a great place to go to school. There's 300,000 college students. And luckily I got scholarships and grants and all that, and went to Emerson. And glad I did, because, early on I had met friends, like as you do at the beginning of college, and we formed a comedy group because everyone was pretty funny, and there was 4 friends of ours who had been part of a comedy group the year before. Now the school was backing this thing called the Emerson Comedy Workshop, and it was amazing. We became very popular at the school. We were taking lots of chances and doing lots of funny things, and being creative and making films and audio bits and live stage performances and improv and music, and we blew people away. We felt pretty confident that if we just keep at it, we would do well. And it was the go-to ticket for the school was to be in the audience for one of our shows. And, I learned so much about comedy. And the very first bit we ever did, ever, was a country western bit. And I played this guy Eustace in the bit, and I had the first laugh. So in the history of the Emerson Comedy Workshop, I got the first actual laugh. And it was so powerful to get that crowd of, I think, maybe 250 people to have a laugh that strong. It was like a drug, and I've been chasing that laugh my whole life.
And the people you did this with, I was reading, in Wikipedia, that Dennis Leary was also part of that group.
Yeah, Dennis was a year older. I had, my friends were Chris Phillips and Adam Roth, who have gone on to incredible things. But Dennis was a year older than us, and he was in the comedy group that I was talking about earlier, the 4 different people in it. This girl, Jody Hafner, who was fantastic, and David Whiteman, and this other guy I wasn't close with, and I forgot his name. But the 4 of them did comedy. So the next year, Dennis and David, the 2 of them with Jody as in charge, had formed this comedy workshop for my freshman year. So me and Chris and Adam, we went to the early meetings of it and became part of the group. And, pretty much right away, we all hit it off. And, Dennis was an incredible writer. He was the head of the literary magazine at the school, and he was, a prolific writer. And so he would write, him and his childhood friend, Mike McGinn, who also went to college with us, who was one of the funniest people we've ever had in our group, didn't decide to use comedy as a career. But we were really blessed to be around some really, really funny people. And Jody Hafner, who was our next door neighbor, who was the president of the group and very funny in her own right, and her roommate, Dana Nathan, who's, all these people are still friends all these years later. It was really a great group of really talented, creative people. And we were successful at it. And, I had met Norman Lear, who had gone to Emerson as well, early on in my sophomore year in college, and I told him about our comedy group, and he was very interested. And we ended up having a deep chat about it. And he ended up donating money to the school, and the school matched it and formed the first ever comedy writing department in comedy in college kind of thing. And it's still going on today. In fact, now you can major in a comedy career at Emerson, where it was just a conversation I had with Norman Lear back in the 80s. And the cool thing is I met Norman Lear years later, and I just had an incredible breakfast with him, and he was just a great man. Spirited conversations, a lot of fun. And I told him, and I thanked him for that meeting, and he said, I don't remember that, but it sounds like me, it sounds like something I do. And it was pretty cool. And, since then I've had a couple of dealings with him, and, we were very lucky. We had a lot of people before us that were very talented. Andrea Martin of SCTV, Jay Leno, Henry Winkler, Norman Lear had gone to Emerson. And then after us, during the time I was there with Dennis, Mario Cantone, Lauren Dombrowski, great comedy actor, and also a great writer who ended up being one of the head writers at Mad TV. We were all in school together. Stephen Wright was, in school with us. He wasn't in our group, but he would do bits for us and film work for us. And it was, just a talented group. And then as we were moving on, then, people like Bill Burr came along, and Anthony Clark, and Laura Keitlinger, and, Jen Kirkman, and it was just on and on, David Cross, and just keep naming names of some of the great comedy people who have come out of Emerson. So it was, it was a great pipeline for comedy talent, and it still is today, all these years later.
Sounds like it was a golden age of times.
Yeah, to bear fruit.
Wow. I feel lucky because, in my life, I've had a couple of those times in my life where you're just around people and you have a sense in the moment, these are all very talented, funny, good people. And to have the wherewithal to know that in the moment, I think, adds to maybe the preciousness of it or the awakeness of it. But wow, I didn't even realize all those Stephen Wright and Bill Burr and all of them, because I knew one of my friends, Joe Schappa, went to Emerson, and he always talked about, what a great experience it was there. But for me, it was not even something that I really knew about.
Right, Jeff Coolidge, and I mean, you can go on and on and on with the people that had gone to Emerson. Doug Herzog, who was one of my close friends in college, went on to run Comedy Central, and he ran Fox TV for a long time, and I mean, he's the kind of people that we went to school with, are some of the greatest writers and performers in the history of television. So we were very lucky, and Stephen Wright was sort of what influenced a bunch of us to do stand up, to begin with, and then have a great career. And to this day, we're all friends. We're all we all know each other 40 plus years. It's great.
I mean, it seems like if no one's done it, it merits some type of documentary, some type of show where something to have those people talk about that period of time. Is there anything like that? Is there a documentary about that period?
Fran Salamita was a comedian from the Bay Area who moved to Boston, and him and his brother had some nice success doing comedy, and Fran was our friend, and he had come up with a documentary, created one called When Stand-Up Stood Out, and it was about the Boston scene sort of during, just a little bit after our Emerson thing started. And the only thing that documentary lacked was this whole Emerson thing that was going on. And when I told Fran about it, he says, "Oh, I can't believe it." And he was so apologized over and over again. We were at the Boston Comedy Festival, and we were at a lecture, and we were discussing his film. And I said, "Fran, you missed out on this whole, at that time when you were making this documentary, at that time, there was this incredible, barrage of comedy coming out of Emerson that really, was a major part of the scene, and you missed that in the film." So maybe it's a blessing that he missed that, and maybe one day someone will do a great doc on, that time in Boston when Emerson College, was, churning out and continued to churn out this incredible group of young performers.
Wow. And so after Emerson, where do you end up going after that, the next part of your journey?
I stayed and taught a workshop, at the school during the summer, and taught kids the combination of interpersonal communications and improv. And it was really nice. I stayed in Boston. It's a beautiful city. The summer was fantastic, but all my friends had kind of left, and they had moved to New York, and my sister had now moved from Florida up to New York, and we were very close. And I didn't really know my father that well, and he was in New York, and all signs pointed for me to leave Boston, where we were big fish in a small pond, to the challenge of going to New York and taking it to the next level. So, oddly enough, 10 years to the day I left New York City, 10 years to the day, August 23rd, 1970 to August 23rd, 1980, I moved back to New York and moved in with a couple of guys in the East Village who were friends of the guy Adam Roth. I mentioned his name earlier, incredible guitar player and funny man who was in our comedy group, and a very important person in our lives. Two of his friends had a room in an apartment, so I moved in with them. We all lived in the East Village, and we continued, to get back together again and perform as a group a little bit. We did some shows under the Acme, which was a restaurant, a Cajun restaurant in the East Village, and we continued. And then in 1984, a fellow college mate was working at a restaurant in the West Village, and actually in the Greenwich Village in the middle over on 3rd Street. He had called me and said, "Look," and I had stopped doing stand-up. I thought that was really fun, but, I have to get a career. I started stand-up again in 84 because this gentleman, Joe Mauricio, who was working at the restaurant, said, "Hey, there's a room downstairs from our restaurant. Nothing's going on in there. It used to be an incredible performance space. They're looking for comedy. Will you put, comics together to do a show?" And of course, I had met, other comedians while I was early in New York, Colin Quinn and Susie Essman and, a bunch of people like that. And I started a comedy club in the Village. And I was a comedian. So I was looking out for the comedians. I knew what comedians wanted, and I knew how to put a room together, and all of a sudden we were wildly successful, and it was a really incredible experience. Adam Sandler was going to NYU, and he'd come into the club, often, and thank God he would bring like 20, 30 of his friends, and we'd fill the room up, and he was hilarious. And there were we started meeting a lot of people like John Mendoza and Brett Butler and Dennis Miller, and on and on. And then Judy Gold, and I have a list of some of the people who came to the Paper Moon in the early days, to perform. Bob Goldthwait, and on and on and on, the great comedians. And I'd bring in a lot of the Boston comedians, Tony V and Don Gavin and Dennis, who stayed in Boston. And it became a very popular comedy club until 1988, when I had to get rid of it because I was now spending a lot of my time in L.A., and gave it to this gentleman, Barry Katz, who turned it into the Boston Comedy Club, which became a different comedy club because it was upstairs. Legendary Boston Comedy Club was originally the Paper Moon, the comedy club that I had started.
Okay, wow. So that was the Paper Moon that eventually became Boston and he called it the Boston Comedy Club because he was from Boston?
He was from Boston. The name of his company was the Boston Comedy Company, and he wanted the club. He knew I was moving it, and I was giving it to this Long Island booker who was very successful and still very successful at management, named Rick Messina. And Barry called me up. He was angry. He said, "Why are you giving it to Rick Messina?" I said, "Well, you live in Boston, and Rick lives in New York." And then Rick called me back and said, "Look, thanks for the offer, but I'm going to go out to L.A. to do my career out there as a manager." And he had signed Dennis Miller and Drew Carey right away, so he did pretty well. I signed Tim Allen, these guys right away. And so I called Barry back. I said, "Barry, look, Rick's not taking the club. Do you want it?" And he said, "Yeah, I would love it." Because, Barry and I were friends, and I helped him a lot with his new business. And, I was working on my father's store at one time. It was selling wholesale electronics, and I had got Barry his whole phone system for his new offices and everything. So we were, and I worked for him when I was doing stand-up, So Barry said, "Yeah, I'm all over it." So he didn't have a name for it, and he decided he would call it the Boston Comedy Club. So here we are in New York, and it's like, going to Boston and seeing New York-style pizza, it was that kind of thing.
Pre-COVID, there were so many places to do open mics in New York City. You could do 5 or 6 open mics if you wanted to a day. Where would people do it? When you were doing the Paper Moon, where were some of the places where stand-ups could get up just to do open mics or to get time? Was Caroline's around then, or Stand Up New York?
Caroline's was at the Seaport, and the cool thing is I brought a lot of headliners in that didn't work the New York scene. I remember Jimmy Tingle would come in from Boston, and a bunch of great comics had come to the Paper Moon. And the person who was booking Caroline's would come every week to look at who the headliners were and see what they did. So they were able to be able to see comedians and book them at Caroline's. Not everybody. I mean, they booked a lot of great people on their own, but I knew that the booker of Caroline's would come often to the Paper Moon and see some of the headliners they had never seen or heard before. And I brought in Lou Schneider from Chicago, and Jake Johansson and people like that from the West Coast, and so we were bringing in all these people that they had never seen before, and it was working out. So there were a lot of clubs. There was this Comedy Cellar and Comedy U Grand on University, and and in those because in those days there was the comic strip Catch a Rising Star, very close to each other, and the Improv, and they were kind of like a cliquey kind of a group, and they'd put pretty much the same people on all the time, and of course the talent was amazing. So it wasn't like they're putting on these lousy comedians. Richard Belzer was pretty much hosting all the time, and you had Larry David and some of the greatest comics in the world coming through Catch a Rising Star, and Eddie Murphy and Seinfeld were working at the comic strip, and so there were great comedians at those clubs, but there was a lot of comedians that didn't get work in New York because they weren't part of that clique. I was the venue that these people can come to and work out, so it worked out beautifully, and I got so there were, I wouldn't say there were a million open mic rooms, but there were places that would do an open mic here and there that you got to work out. But for me, I was running this club, and I just hosted pretty much every weekend or every other weekend, and that made me a better comic by doing that. Being a host is the hardest job and the most important job in any stand-up show like that. And so, you took it seriously. If you were a good host, you got a lot of work, and you were an important, essential part of the show. A lot of what's happened in the history of stand-up throughout the comedy clubs in America, especially, is except for Boston, which always got it right. The comedy clubs would put the least talented person in as the least, not talented, that's the wrong word, the least experienced comedian to be the host, and that would ruin the show because the host would be. It's such an important job to bring the crowd together, and these people were so nervous, they were brand new. And in Boston, the headliners would host the shows and come out at the beginning and do 20 minutes, then bring up the other comics, and then close the show with 25 minutes. Where in New York, all over the United States, they were like, okay, the person with the least experience would host, then you'd bring up a decent person who was called the middle act, and then you would have the headliner. Well, that format worked, but the audience would go, okay, let's just get through the inexperienced man or woman first, and then see how they do, and then, just get through it because we know eventually it'll be good, as opposed to what I would do is I would book the host would be the most incredible. Like, if I wasn't hosting, I would have Colin Quinn host, or Mike Sweeney, who's the head writer for Conan, I bring him in to host because you needed, you wanted the show to be brilliant, so you needed a host to set the stage for everything.
It's interesting. The name Paper Moon. Where did you get that?
That was already the name of it. Which was
okay.
The odd coincidence there was as a young boy at 14 years old, I lied to get a job at a movie theater because I'm a movie fanatic. You mentioned Cinema Paradiso, my favorite movie of all time, but I would, I worked at a theater, and the first movie that was playing at the theater when I took over as an usher was Paper Moon, and it was, Tatum and Ryan O'Neal and Madeline Kahn, and it was the Academy Award winning, film for Tatum O'Neal, and it was just a brilliant movie. So 9 weeks, my first job, I have to, the movies don't change for 9 weeks. It's that same Paper Moon. As brilliant as it was, I knew every line, and me and the other usher, we'd sit with each other, we'd sit across while the film was going on, and we'd do the dialogue of the film. But so oddly enough, weird coincidence, the club that I get to run and manage was the Paper Moon. Kind of funny, kind of the way that worked.
Well, I still sometimes, periodically I'll go on YouTube and I'll watch that, spoiler alert for anybody who's listening, that part in Cinema Paradiso where the man has cut together all the footage for him,
yeah,
of the people kissing. It's still just, even having not seen the whole movie, just that alone, it wells up so much in me. I don't know why.
The movie's about love. The movie is the ultimate homage to filmmaking and films, and it's the love between a mother and a son, the love between a mother, a boy and his mentor, the love of a young boy and a young girl, and also the love of cinema and the whole part of love and kissing, which would be edited out because people were so uptight about love. When love should be celebrated and treated as beautiful, it was treated as naughty and not worth it, which creates a society which is, uptight and not progressive. These films were being edited, and then in Cinema Paradiso, as a spoiler alert, they put that whole thing together, and you can't help but well up because that's how love affects human beings. Comedy affects human beings a certain way, and love and sexuality also affect human beings. So, there are people in society who are very uptight and want to, what is the word? Sort of censor love and censor comedy, censure love and comedy, but because they're too uptight to be able to let themselves feel that, or they've been hurt so many times that they're afraid to love or afraid to laugh. But in reality, that's what we need to do more than ever, more than anything.
Mm-hmm. And so you hand off this thing, the Paper Moon that you've grown, and then what takes you out to L.A.?
In '86, I did Star Search, and I after my performance, I went to the Comedy Store and the Improv to audition, and they both passed me but the Improv said I had to move out there in order to get stage time, and the Comedy Store said, look, anytime you're here. So I accepted the Comedy Store's offer because, I was a young comic and I wasn't famous enough to have a choice to say I'll work both of them. You had to kind of make a choice. So I made a choice with the Comedy Store. And, early on in '87, I came there back to this club, and I just happened to have a set that Sam Kinison saw, and he was kind of running the store, and he took me under his wing and made life beautiful for me. I was working pretty much every night at the Comedy Store, and not only was I working there, I was living there right behind the Comedy Store in a building that was once Errol Flynn's house that now housed me, one of the producers at the club, Tom Waring, and then also Sandy Shore, the daughter of Mitzi Shore. So I was living it pretty much at the Comedy Store, and I was sort of running the comedy club in New York from afar. Had my best friend Chris Phillips, who I mentioned very early on, help me to run the place, but I couldn't really do it anymore. So I decided that I would start spending more time in LA. I would get an apartment there eventually, because I was living in the basement of this tiny little place and was able to split an apartment with comics in LA, and then at the same time take my apartment in New York and split that with a couple of comedians. So it really I wasn't able to be at the comedy club, and when you can't be there, it's not as effective, and that's when I decided, I had to give this up. I had to focus on my career because, one thing that was happening is when you're booking something, I'm a comic, and here I am booking something. So every gig I did, the comics, and I don't blame them, would want to work for me at the comedy club, the Paper Moon. So it was not 98% of the time, 100% of the time when I'd work on the road or work on a gig, the comics would be like sort of auditioning for me or like, playing up to like, oh, can I work at the club? And, there's only 52 weeks in the year and you can only have 52 headliners. And, so it was kind of a freedom thing to stop booking the Paper Moon. And it was more of a freedom to just be a stand-up and be myself and go on stage. And it really was it gave me a freedom, which then led me to start working in Europe, which was a bigger freedom and a bigger lesson and one of the biggest teachers in my life, because I had nothing to compare what we were doing in America until I started working a lot in England, when I really realized how they did a lot of things right that we screwed up. And it really taught me to be a better comic and taught me to be a better performer.
In what way, if you can quantify it?
There was a lot of pandering in America, a lot of trying to please people, trying to, that sort of insecure comedy, where in England they just, they didn't really care about the intro. Some people did, but it wasn't a main thing. They didn't, I once gave my intro, which we do in America, and it makes sense, to the MC in England. He looked at me like, he thought I was bragging about my career. He didn't know that he really took offense to it. He was like, why are you telling me what you've done? I said, my intro. He goes, well, why would you want an intro? He said, why talk about how good you are before you go up there? Just go up there and be good, and then the audience will know if you're good or not. Why set yourself up for a fall by telling them all the experience you've had in the past? And then I realized that, and I realized like how many people in America would say, hey, let's hear it for the troops, or, they'd get applause or laughter based on the sort of work that other people did, as opposed to getting laughs based on what you're doing. So, in England, I remember saying, it's great to be here in England, and the crowd was like, bullshit. It was like, they were just like, that was such an American thing to do, to sort of, pander and kiss ass and try to, get favor, from the audience by bragging about all this other stuff that really had nothing to do with how you perform. So then I focused pretty much on just being a good performer. I mean, they barely like when they announced you, they'd put the mic in the stand, they'd walk off. They didn't shake your hand. They not that they didn't want to. It just wasn't done. It was just like, you're the next comic, and if you're on the show, you got to be pretty good, because why would they book you if not? They also gave opportunities to young comics in England on the weekend shows. On a Saturday night, they had a thing called an open spot, which we call a guest spot, where they put a amateur up there and say, look, you're in this show. There's, 4 powerhouse comedians on, and you get to do 5 to 7 minutes. Go out there. And, as opposed to what we would do to young comics in America, to have them host shows that they weren't really ready to do to start the show up there, as opposed, the host, the compares, they called them. These were some of the best comics I'd ever seen. The host in England, it was a whole different scene. And then I started working in Ireland and Paris and Hong Kong, and because they had a whole circuit over there, and I just saw my eyes were opened wide to just focusing on being the best comic, as opposed to being focused on these frivolous things that a lot of American comics were doing.
When you're performing in some place like Hong Kong or Paris, are you performing for expats or,
yeah.
You are, yeah.
Yeah, that's, I mean, in Paris, there was a club that was the best club in the world. And once a month, they'd bring in a comedian, and it was mostly music. And the guy who ran it was brilliant, and he, really put a classy scenario down there, the Hotel du Nord. And, they would sell out every comedy show. The audiences were packed with people from, England and Ireland and Australia and the States, or English-speaking people who were dying for English-speaking performances, comedy, music, whatever. So, you do these shows, and you have to perform by yourself and do like an hour and a half by yourself. You had to go out on stage. The guy who ran the place came out and welcomed everyone, sort of told them who was coming up in the future, and then bring you up, and you'd have to pretty much do like a 45-minute set, take a break so they can get more drinks, and then come back and do another 45 minimum, and it forced me to ad-lib and play, and made me a better comic. And so, but it was, these people would fight to see. When I worked in Hong Kong, people were actually like, pushing and shoving because they were trying to get into the comedy show. It was so popular, and they brought in comics from England and Ireland and Australia, New Zealand and America to perform, and these people were just dying for this entertainment. And it was really, and again, they had seen really great quality, so they didn't want any pandering or any mediocrity. They wanted people who were willing to play and experiment, and you left each show really satisfied as an audience and as a comedian.
I mean, that almost sounds like, the Beatles in Berlin,
Hamburg.
That period where they were away and just got a chance to get a lot of stage time, under the radar to some degree. Yeah,
the Star Club in Hamburg.
Yeah.
I was watching the Beatles a couple of nights ago, a couple of different shows. One from 1964 when they were doing the NME Awards, and then I watched another one where they were in Blackpool, England, doing a show, and it was really fun to watch them, and they were so good and such a good band. And I had that thought. I said, the reason why they're so good is because they spent all that time working out in Hamburg and working every night and doing 3 to 5 shows a night and every night of the week, and just being immersed in it. And that's, as a comic, it's so important to do. That's why during this time when COVID is there, and I went 149 days in between shows, and from March 14th to October 16th before I had done stand-up again, and then I haven't done it since that weekend, that middle October weekend. So you need to be doing it every night. You need to be married to it and in love with it and nurture it and play with it, and it's sad not to be able to do it.
There's no way around stage time, is there?
No, it's that's the best teacher. The most powerful teacher is stage time.
So you're doing these shows abroad. Eventually, you come back to L.A. or New York.
New York.
Mhm.
I had moved back. I was having an incredible time in LA in the late 80s. And in 1990, a whole bunch of circumstances led me to go back to New York. I was with Kinnison and all those folks there and doing a lot of drugs and booze, not ever performing under the influence, but after the shows, we'd party pretty hardy. And it was fun and it was sort of dreamlike, but it kept me. I had to sleep during the days. I didn't, I had to go. The only real work I did was on stage at night. And I would make sure I was sharp. But so I was kind of like, I think I got to get out of here because as much as fun as I'm having, I'm beating myself up a little bit. And at the same time, I had met a woman in Connecticut who was on the East Coast, who I liked very much. And at the same time, the apartment building I was now in by 1990 was being sold, and we were going to have to move out. So the combination of those three things said, look, I'm going to move back to New York and go back to my apartment. I told the other two comics that I was splitting the New York apartment with, and they were totally cool. And I just kept, I stayed in my New York apartment. I went back after that LA experience. I pretty much got out of the, sex, drugs, and rock and roll scene back to mostly comedy, which was mostly happening in Europe for me and also New York. So I didn't run a club in New York, but I was getting stage time. I was doing 500 to 600 shows a week, 500 to 600 shows a year during that era in the 90s. I was doing, 6 or 7 shows on a Friday and 6 or 7 shows on a Saturday, and doing one to 3 sets a night during the week when I was in New York. And then, I did all these corporate shows and hosting shows and private parties, and I was just working nonstop, and I just couldn't help but get better.
Wow. That's just. What does a night look like? Because a lot of also, what I enjoy is the demystification for other people of what a night looks like of doing 5 or 6 shows. Is it you're just going from which club to which club, and how do you time it out?
Well, all the clubs had their time slots, and they all had mostly had 3 shows a night. So if you'd set up, you'd start at the Seaport and do the 7 p.m. show at the Seaport at Caroline's, and then you'd run uptown to the Comedy Cellar for the your set at Caroline's would be like 7 to 7:20, so you would do a 7:40 at the Cellar, and then now you did like an 8:30 at the Stand Up New York, and you just go from club to club to club, and there were so many clubs doing so many shows, and during that time, comics knew to respect the light and get off stage when they were done, when the time was right to get done, because there were a bunch of comics doing this ballet all through the city, running from club to club to club. And if one person's ego took them to do too much time, you screwed up the whole ecosystem of comedy that was going on. So when we'd have an LA comic who didn't know how to respect the light, there were a lot of LA comics who didn't really respect the light, like in New York we did, meaning you get the light and it'd be, you tell them, look, give me a light with 2 minutes, give me a light with 5 minutes. You had to respect that to make the scene work. It was a win-win when everyone was adhering to that. And then you get some ego person who'd come in and go, yeah, well, and then do 10 minutes extra. It would screw everything up for everybody.
Can you hear me?
Yep, yes. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I just cut it. My phone just fell for a second.
Okay.
What was your writing process like, during this time? Because that's the other thing with people who do this, who want to do this rather, are like, how do you sit down and you write it? Do you do it on stage? Do you take notes?
It's all different. For me, I mostly wrote on stage. I would come up with ideas and bring it onto the stage. But then I would do things that I learned from talking and watching George Carlin, like, that thing with all the animals that you had mentioned early on or whatever. I made a list of like 40 different cliches with, similes with animals, crazy as a horse, crazy as a loon, all the different little things, and I would come up with like 40 of them and create a story out of 17 of them and memorize it, bring it to the stage. And I did that with a lot of different bits. And then, I'd say the subject was lying. And then I went on stage and told true stories about when I was a kid and how I lied, or when other people lied to me, or these kind of things. And then material came out of it. And then I go, especially on nights I'm doing like 7 shows, I would do it. I would add or subtract on my way to the next show. I'd focus on what I just did and how I can add or subtract based on the response I got from the jokes. It was like a constant worksheet, like you're workshopping through the night, and then you have either a new polished bit by the end, or one you just throw away, or one you just put on the side and come back to it another time. But it's always was different. It's always different for me.
Were you teaching throughout that time, or were there other people who helped direct you, or you were just kind of did people just do it on their own back then?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, I mean, like in the world of improv, or, like Second City, we had directors, who would direct us.
Oh, I see. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I've for over 20 years, maybe more, I've run workshops around the world, and I don't look at it as teaching comedy, because I don't believe you can really teach. You can workshop comedy, you could workshop acting, you can workshop music, you can workshop the arts, and get feedback from people you respect, and sort of understand how you're perceived by others when you do these workshops. They're very helpful, and I would do those, and it would be really fun. And some people would be offended. They go, "Oh, well, how can you run these workshops? What do you know about comedy? Or you can't teach comedy." And I go, "I agree with you. You can't teach it, but you can workshop it. You can, work out material that you're trying, and then let the audience say, oh, when you do this and you do that, or whatever." And, I would oftentimes throughout my life, I'd work with comedians for the weekend, and the comedian would come up and go, "Hey, that joke you do? What if you did this there instead?" And then so I try it, and if it worked, do it again. If it didn't work, I'd maybe try something else. And it's a constant, there are comics I've worked with along the way who don't want to do that, and that's totally fine. But it's kind of fun to do workshops. And when you're giving critiques and respectful critiques with integrity, you learn a lot. You learn a lot from offering creative ideas to other people. So whenever I taught a workshop, it made me a stronger comic. It made me a more aware comic. So I would use the combination of sort of perceptions I get from other comics and my own instincts, and combine them to see what would work the best. And sometimes it didn't work, advice I got from other people, but that's okay. At least you were aware of how you look. Like, I remember there was this one bit I had done that was about "you drive me up the wall," and I would act out that I was being literally driving up a wall. And when I saw it on television, when I did it on television, it didn't get the biggest laugh I thought it would get. And then I looked at it and realized, well, I really didn't act it out well enough. I didn't commit to it. And at the same time, a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, I saw you on TV, and when you did that thing with the drive me up the wall, you really didn't commit to it." And I was like, "Yeah, I saw that." And then I went the next night and did it in a show, and I really committed to it, and I got a huge laugh. And I went, it's kind of nice when people reach out to kind of let you know, or you can even use your own eyes and ears to see, where you're lacking, because, you're in your body looking out. You're not looking at you.
Mm-hmm. I remember hearing once or reading, to know, read, to learn, write, and to master, teach. So, I mean, for me, it always helps that whenever there's a piece of me that would have been a teacher, 50, 100, 200 years ago. I think I enjoy not teaching, but workshopping, helping people out, because I have a similar opinion to yours that, it's just acting as a third eye that's maybe a little further down the road than the people you're working with. So you're in New York City, you're traveling Europe. At what point does the Letterman gig happen?
In 97, beginning of 97, I was doing the audience warm-up for the Dana Carvey show, which is a very fantastic, smart show, and it didn't last long because it was too smart for television, American television. So it didn't last, which was a shame because it was hilarious and smart and had a stellar cast of people like Steve Carell and Colbert and Dana Carvey and on and on and on, and great directors and great writers. It was just powerful show, all stars, top to bottom. And one of the writers on the show was working at Letterman, and Letterman was looking for a warm-up comic, and I got recommended. And I went in for a meeting with the producers, and Letterman came into the meeting. He had asked me some questions. I had explained to him that I, too, was a regular at the Comedy Store in L.A. like he was, and he was very generous. And then I got a 6-week trial period, and it lasted 17 years.
Wow. Again, Bad Sullivan Theater, something you watched when you were younger, and all of a sudden.
Oh my God! Yeah.
That's just. Those are those little connect the dot moments to me that are just goosebump level.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because that's the best theater I've ever done comedy in, and to be able to do that every night for 17 years, it just made me a better performer, better comic, and it was dream come true, and it was on the stage where Elvis was there, or the Supremes, or it was just amazing, and I didn't take it for granted. And every night when I came to work, I really dedicated myself every night. There was no phoning it in, because we were forced to take our show to the highest level. Everyone who worked there was the best at what they did. The main cameraman was Walter Cronkite's cameraman, and the lighting person was the best lighting person. The writers were from Harvard, and the executive producers were all these talented people who had gone up through the ranks with Letterman and had, were just brilliant at what they did. So when you were working there, you were forced to take your game to the next level, to the highest level. And so every night there I was, working with the best of the best. And of course, it just takes you're just forced to take that higher step.
And then at a certain point, you're helping to find other comics who get a chance to be on Letterman while you're there. You're booking.
Yeah, well, I was already working still as a comic, so the best way I found comics was from other comics. People would call me and say, because Letterman, liked the quirky, sort of not character-driven comics, but sort of the quirky, great writers like Jake Johansson was on the show the most, because that was the kind of comic that Letterman really liked. So, you're looking for those kind of comics, the one of a kinds. And, people say, well, they'll tell a comic, hey, you remind me of Stephen Wright. I'm just making this up. And so that means that I should be looking to get Stephen Wright. The booking should be someone who's so original that you're the only person who does what you do in that sort of fashion. And, we didn't have a lot of spots for comics, but it was kind of fun to help a lot of young comics in their career. And, and I was dedicated. I was a comic who was booking comics, and I wanted to be the person who I wanted as a booker when I was auditioning for shows. So I made myself available to everyone and gave my email address and my phone number. And, I was bombarded by, I was telling you earlier about how being bombarded to book people at the Paper Moon was overwhelming. But here I am around the world working in Australia, and, working comics, and every night they were auditioning for the Letterman show. So what I would do when I went to Australia, I'd spend 3 nights just looking at 30 of the local comics in Sydney, who were the best of the best in Sydney and Melbourne, who'd come to audition, And it was hard because I had to say no 99.9% of the time, because out of the thousands of comedians, one year I put on 12, or one year I put on 15, and of the 12 or 15, I had to put on some of them that were Letterman's favorites, or his friends, or this other stuff, and understandable. And, it just made my job harder, but it was a challenge that I accepted. And, there's parts of me that wish I never did it, because, I lost out on the fact that I could really focus on my own stand-up. I had to sort of not give up my stand-up career, but I wasn't really, it's an excuse, but I wasn't writing as much because I was seeing so much other people's material. I mean, I was seeing thousands of sets. And, but the other part is, the kind of help that I did for people, and the kind of offers, the kind of, like, even people who didn't get the show, like a lot of young comics would write to me, and I'd spend time with their set, and I'd go break it down for them and talk to them on the phone or sit them down in person. And it was really, and made me a better comic. I remember Larry Miller, one of the greatest comics of all time. He hadn't done stand-up on television in 15, 20 years, and it was ridiculous because he's one of the greatest ever. And I approached him about doing stand-up, and he was kind of nervous, and then he put the set together. And working with Larry Miller made me a better comic. And then, because he was willing, we were like, instead of me looking at him as the genius, which he was, he looked at me as like a peer and said, okay, how can we make this joke work? And we go back and forth, and we get it down to a science. And he'd go out there and crush with it, and I'm on the side watching it and feeling like, all right, I'm part of this. It was a really nice feeling. But of course, at the same time, there's a lot of people who wish they did the show and were bummed that I couldn't put them on, and some took it personally, which they, shouldn't have been, because I never made it personal. I just had a job to do, and I did it the best that for the people I work for, what they had wanted me to do.
When a comic gets a spot on Letterman or a show like that, how much time do they get?
4.5 minutes.
And do they have to show the script beforehand to be like, here's what I'm doing? They know everything that's going to be said.
Yeah, because, you have to go through standards and practices to get the set approved, and the producers have to approve it, and they know what Dave likes and what he doesn't like. And there are certain, things that Dave didn't want comics to do, like talk about drugs, or, there was like things like that Dave kind of wanted the comics not to do. But it was mainly, we had to get everything approved. The comic went on stage, and only like maybe 2 or 3 times in all the times I was booking comics did a comic go off their set and do something that we weren't ready for. And the whole staff was not happy with that. They weren't mad at me, but that certain comic was not allowed to come back because they went off script.
So 4.5 minutes is roughly, 4 jokes a minute maybe? So 4 times 4.
You know what? Mitch Hedberg used to do 14 jokes in 4.5 minutes.
Wow. 14 jokes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when you quantify it, you're talking about 14 different jokes. Is your 4.5 minutes your first time on a late night show?
Yeah, that's, like the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, I think they did 6-minute sets. But for some reason, they wanted us to have the comics do 4.5, and that didn't include the band playing and Dave doing the intro and then coming up at the end to shake the hand of the comedian or whatever. But the set was 4.5 minutes. Now, when you did it on television, the set would extend a little bit because if the audience applauded at something, there's a lot, there's that sort of American audience thing where people applaud things, even if they're not. They just feel like, here's a place for me to applaud. So sometimes the set would go 6 minutes because of those other factors that would go in there. But I think the segment was 8 minutes, which included the extra applause and the laughter and the band playing and Dave doing the intro and outro.
But roughly 14 to 16 jokes for most people.
Well, different people, different things. I remember Jim Gaffigan would do a set and he'd only talk about pie for 4.5 minutes, or, different comics, different things. I just remember Hedberg, it just worked out to 14 jokes for him. It was kind of interesting.
I just watched his special again the other day. I don't know why. I guess for me, partially because right now I'm at a crossroads in my life again, where I've spent 30 years doing improv. Mm-hmm. There's a piece of me, and I don't know if I'll be able to save the 4 spaces that we have. And so there's a piece of me that's like, should I have been doing stand-up this whole time instead of doing improv? So I've just been kind of trying to watch, what I always enjoyed.
My suggestion is not to worry about what you could have done. It's what you do now, what action plan you take now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Look, I could have done this yesterday. I could have had this conversation with you yesterday, and then tonight I'd be watching some movie, but I didn't. I'm doing it now, and this is all that matters right now in the world, Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever get a chance to see Bill Hicks or Andy Kaufman in your time?
Never saw Andy Kaufman, although I became really close friends with Cindy Williams, who was Shirley on Laverne and Shirley. and she was really great friends with him, so I got to learn a lot about Andy, which was really great. Um, but Hicks and I became good friends, and we weren't best friends, but we'd work a lot together, and he actually influenced me a lot because he had said to me how when we hang out together, I was deeper than when I was on stage. I was more on the surface, and he had told me to stop doing this love me dance that I did on stage and to really be the person I was off stage, and that really clicked with me and then I became a better comic, you know.
He's among, if you have to like think about the greats, he's up there, right, with Pryor and Carlin and Hicks.
Oh yeah, he was one of those. They're all different kinds of comics. I remember, during the warm up every night, Letterman would spend 3 minutes with the audience and answering questions or playing around with them. And one night, about 15 years in, because I didn't know any of this, I surprisingly had never asked Dave this. Well, somebody there and said, "Who's your favorite comedian?" And without missing a beat, he said Jonathan Winters. So if you look at Jonathan Winters, he's one of the greatest comedians of all time. There's a very famous clip, if you've never seen it, called The Stick. And it was Jonathan Winters on the Jack Parr show, and he was a young guy, and Parr hands him a stick and says, "Go have at it." Mm-hmm. And since you're an improv guy, he just improv for 6 minutes. I think it was 6 minutes, 4.5 to 6 minutes on this stick. So, Jonathan Winters, or like the style of Lily Tomlin, who's one of my biggest influences, is Lily, who I got to work with, and it was amazing for me. We hugged, and there was love and appreciation for each other, and it was really like dream come true. She was an incredible performer. She, like Pryor, was this, did characters and performance and said a lot with her face and her movement. And so there's so many different kinds of comedians. But when it comes down to the people who said things that, sort of made a difference, there's Chappelle, there's Hicks, there's, the combination of what Norm Macdonald does. There's very few people who do what he does. It's just, he's kind of out there, but he's very, very incredible. He's an incredible performer. He's an incredible mind. And, there's so many. And then you have like somebody like Maria Bamford, who's one of my favorite comics, who goes out on stage, and her style is very, very surreal in a way. I don't know if that's the right word, but she has this style that's all her own, and it's just so lovely. And the best comic I've ever seen live, and that's a lot to say, the best comic I've ever seen live is Paula Poundstone. You see her live. There's nobody who can take a crowd and turn this crowd from whatever they are to just being in love with her. She was just brilliant. So there's a lot of different styles and a lot of different ways to so the original question was about Hicks, and so I say I put Hicks in the category of Chappelle and Carlin and Pryor. Where Pryor is a little different because he had a bigger range where he did a lot of characters. Even though, Hicks would do these characters. Bill Burr does a lot of he does the woman thing. He does that voice. I'm having asparagus. Oh, they have asparagus. He does those characters. But, Pryor would just completely go into a whole character for a whole series. Or Lily would go into a whole character. So there's different people along the way who had different styles.
It seems like when you were talking about how you gave up the paper moon and you went out to L.A., it reminded me of that line in Fight Club: "Once you lose everything, you're free to do anything."
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel a little bit now, because it's been 9 months, and for what I did, it was hard to get up on stage and do stuff, or this is my own stuff, that I would say something or do something that people would go, "You see, that's the owner of the pit, and, he said this thing." It's just so hard to say and do stuff and fail the way those guys. When I watched Pryor's 1971 kind of special, I was like, the things he was saying was unbelievable. That, I don't know, it seems like I don't know where you can go to fail these days without someone.
Well, you know what? You have, if you're running a place, you can fail. You can go up there and fail. That's one of the ways to do it. You run your own venue, and it gives you the chance to fail. Be really good at what you do, and then, just go up there, and then, you have the freedom to fail. But you just have to be able to be strong enough to be able to be comfortable enough in your own skin to know that. I wish I had the guts to fail more often at a younger age. I just like I'd be performing at a club. Say I'm at the Comedy Works in Denver, and I'm there Tuesday through or Wednesday through Saturday. On Sunday night, the great owner of the club would put on 10 of the local acts for me. Wendy Curtis was one of the greatest minds in comedy. She runs the Comedy Works in Denver, and she would put on 10 comics for me to look at on Sunday night. And, so when I was performing and those comics were around, I wanted to do really well, because if I'm going to perform, like, who am I to book these people if I can't do it? You know what I mean? So I got in my own head about it, and I made a mistake of, like, not experimenting all the time, which I should have been experimenting more, but I was so worried about what other people thought instead of just going out there and being really great at what I did, because I was not caring about everything so much, and I was able to play and able to fail and able to take chances. We learn from our mistakes, and if you don't make any mistakes, you really, in a way, you learn a lot less. So now is the time you're questioning a lot of things. In this interview with me, you said a few things that are very, that's very transparent, that you're afraid to fail, you're afraid to go back, you're looking at the past, and you're questioning yourself. And the truth is that all of things should be clear to you, that no, you need to fail, you need to take chances, you need to start again, you need to do what you love. And as soon as we're able to do this kind of stuff, you'll be ready. In the meantime, why not? I'm writing almost every day. I just got a writing job, actually, and I'm knocking on the door of some other kinds of work. So, there. At the beginning, I was making excuses, sitting around and getting fat, just eating and not working and wishing I could do stand-up. And then after a while, it was like, well, how is this serving me? So I just said, well, how can I get around it? Well, eat better, eat healthier, and at the same time, write all the time. And this way it's like lifting weights. You're moving a muscle and you're working that muscle. And when the time came up for a writing job, I auditioned for it, and I was ready to go and got hired because I was dedicated and, was in a good frame of mind, felt confident in my writing.
What do you think, the future of New York City stand-up? I know there have been these, somebody says New York's dead, somebody else says New York's not dead. I mean, how do you see the next year? For us, we just hear, you're not going to be able to be back in a space until June, and then maybe not till end of the 2021.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. So if we knew, if there was an answer and it's like, oh yeah, April 14th, that's when we can all go back. We don't know. So in the when we can all go back, then we'll all go back. That's the way it is. You have to be ready when you go back. That's the way it is. You, instead of worrying about when we can go back, we have to, there's New York has always risen from the ashes, and it matters who the people are. And one of the great things about New York is we can take a hit and come back, stronger and better and more proud, and with a couple of, it's like the best way to describe it is like you're you hurtling through space, and you have this shape that is you. And as you're hurtling through space, you hit like different little things along the way. And now it changes your shape a little bit, because when you went through space, you had hit, some kind of rock in the middle of space. So now your shape is different. Then you hit something else, and now you're shiny over there, and you're harder over here, and all of a sudden when you come out of it, you're completely different than when you went through this journey that you took. So you just look at it. Look, I'm going to be, after 9/11, we're different people here in New York. After this pandemic, we're all going to be different people. In the meantime, we can either sit around and complain, which I did for a long time, or you can get out there and make an action plan. What am I going to do today? Well, today I had a writers meeting, and I had the interview with you. And before that, I took care of things that I had to do business-wise, and I took care of things I had to do, with insurance companies, and I made a list of things I had to do. So I had a full day today, and I made sure that I got what I needed to do today done. And now I'll have to wait till tomorrow I'm not focusing on tomorrow. I'm focusing on only our interview now.
Well, I mean, it's flown by. I mean, I've so much. I mean, I'd love to someday in the real world get coffee and just sit down someplace and talk about stand up and, I don't know. I mean, you're right, but I am at a crossroads where I'm just like.
So what are you going to do about it?
I mean, I've been writing. I've been doing like little things like this thing. Like this thing that I'm doing has been born out of the virus. Where for me, I was like, I looked down at my phone one day in the beginning of the virus, and I was like, if the 14-year-old Ali saw the phone numbers you have in your phone, he would say, why aren't you calling your friends and talking to them?
Mm-hmm.
And that began to like, hey, will you talk to me? Will you talk to me? Like, yeah, sure. And, and even this just came out of saying yes to Joe Lipari, hey, can I interview? Sure. And then seeing your name going, I've always wanted to talk to Eddie Brill. And then, it's just kind of the yes and following the fear and, trying to do that, because I grew up loving, Larry King. I loved listening to Larry King late night on my clock radio when everybody else was asleep in the house. I loved doing that, so I'm trying to find like, what did I enjoy doing before any of this stuff? And I did enjoy doing stand up. And then I just kind of dedicated to improv and sketch comedy. And I've done stand up, 150, 200 times, but it's something that I definitely, every time I have an idea, I write it down. So I'm not dismissing it because I know you've got to put it somewhere and then figure out a way to get up and do that idea.
Yeah, or listen to an album that makes you laugh, or listen to music that makes you happy, or watch a film that inspires you. One of the things I remember hearing about Paul Mooney, who wrote for Pryor, is a great comic in his own right, Paul Mooney, who's prolific. He said after the shows he would go to listen to a band and be inspired and then go home and write. And then, that's what he'd do. He would, do whatever it took to be inspired and then go use his inspiration to get things, to keep going at it. So, I mean, I'm as guilty as anybody else as far as complaining or, making excuses, or I didn't do this because I didn't do that, or I'm a victim because this happened or this happened. But in reality, if I take action, something good's going to come out of it. And even if nothing ever good comes out of it, well, at least I know I gave it my best shot.
Have you ever thought about doing a memoir of any kind?
Yeah, I have written over 300 memoir stories that I think are very provocative and evocative. And the problem I'm having is I had an agent who tried to sell it and wasn't able to. And I've had people like Stephen Wright and Dick Cavett and, from one end of the spectrum to the other say, your stories are amazing. I'd be happy to write anything for it or whatever. I mean, I believe in my writing, and I've gotten to be a better writer. Even if I'm, as far as my mind is concerned, I've improved as a writer because I've been writing for about 3 years, working on this book. Well, all I need is someone who's willing to publish it, and I know that I can get some of the greatest minds in the world to back it and to help push it. I just got to get someone who's willing to do that, and I've worked really hard with my writing, and it's also made me a better writer. I put a story up on Facebook today about assumptions that I had written, and then I had worked on it and re-edited it, even though I had written it a couple of years ago or a year and a half ago. And again, I was happy with the story I had, and I was happy with the results of the editing that I did. So, yeah, I just need to find a publisher who's willing to take the chance, because I think the stories are pretty, like I said, there's some prolific stories. There's some great stories about Joan Rivers, who was incredible to me and helped me with my very first Letterman set. And, I have a million stories. I've had this incredible life. And, every time I start going, woe is me, and all this stuff, I'm like, oh my God. Like even talking to an interviewer like yourself or anyone, I will find myself, like, oh wow, that's cool. Oh, that was a cool thing I did. Or wow, Carlin liked me. You know what I mean? It's like all that kind of stuff.
Do you have a title for it?
I had originally had a title on it for it, and then I changed it a couple of times. And one of the ones, think it was, I was just warming up, was the idea, because that was the warm up. So I'm like, just warming up, like I'm wherever I am now, I'm just warming up. I got, I'm ready to do more.
I don't know why, but I have this notepad that I have, and I had your name at the top. And as we were talking, I just wrote, and you may have heard this before. It may sound cheesy, but a brilliant life.
Oh, that's great. It's hard for someone to, like in England, Brill means, incredible. Mm. And one of the things I had written in the story about assumptions was I was working in England. I was in Manchester, the Comedy Store in Manchester, sitting around with 6 comics who were working that weekend in the area, and people I really respect and love, and I'd become very close with, and we were chatting, and I said, they were asking me questions about America comedy and how this works, and sort of having a chat like you and I are having. And he said one of the guys, I asked them, I said, well, it's interesting. You guys, a lot of you guys don't use your real names. A lot of you comics here have, funny names. Like, instead of if your name is Bill Johnson, you don't go on stage as Bill Johnson. I remember working with a guy whose name was Anvil Springsteen. And of course, that's not his given name, but, I remember his name all these years later. Very funny comedian. And then I worked with a guy who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago on stage, while he was on stage. And his stage name was Ian Cognito. So there was a lot of comedians who would change their names. I understand, like Jeff Ross's real name is Lifschultz, and he had a lot of problems with people remembering his name, and then he just used his middle name, became Jeff Ross, and was more popular, more known, and easy to remember his name. But his real name is Jeff Lifschultz, and I understand making that change to Jeff Ross. It makes a lot of sense. But Anvil Springsteen, I'm saying, and they looked at me, and one of the comics said to me, "What are you talking about? You go on stage as Eddie Brill." And I went, "Well, that's my real name." They all started laughing. I go, "No, that's my real name." They go, because in England, when they say that's Brill, that means it's fantastic. So I said, "Do you think that I would change my name to Eddie Fantastic?" And one of the guys says, "Honestly, we did." I said, "All of the comics?" He goes, "Yeah, we all kind of thought it's kind of ballsy to call yourself Eddie Brill." So I took out my passport and I said, "Look, that's my real name." They were like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, that's my real name." I said, in America, we don't use Brill like you guys use the word Brill. And I said, "Look, tell everyone that that's my real name." But for years, people were assuming that I was, a nice guy to work with and a funny comic, but kind of a little bit arrogant with the name choice that I brought on stage.
Would you ever self-publish the book?
It's not that I'm lazy about that, which, I don't, to me, it seems like a mountain that I have to move, but I'm kind of selfish where I want someone to publish it. I don't really want to, I don't know if I would, I would love to have someone else publish it. If I have to, I could, but then, here I'm in my apartment with cases and cases of books, and how do I get it out there? And, maybe I have to hire someone to help try to push it, and, will I get the word out enough to get the books? And, I just, there's, again, it's being a little selfish and a little stubborn, is I would really like some major place to publish it, And I believe in it enough that I believe that it's interesting enough, talking about, working at Letterman and, what it was like to be the warm up, and, there's some really fun, cool stories. And like I said, the other day, Bill Burr, we were just chatting online, just because I had gone down a Bill Burr rabbit hole and was laughing my ass off at like 3 a.m. And I just texted him out of the blue, or instant messaged him, and just said, I just quoted back one of the jokes that he had done that made me, I was crying, laughing so hard. And he wrote back, "Oh, thanks, blah, blah, blah," in conversation. And in the end, he goes, "I really love the stories you write." And it was just like, look, Bill Burr is one of the greatest comics in history. He likes my stories. Why wouldn't, thousands of readers want to read it? And that's, my own personal wish and want, but maybe it's only good for comics, or maybe only, maybe people are, I know that some people would rather have me write a book on dirt, like, oh, this comic did this, or Letterman did this, and that doesn't interest me. That's, I couldn't live a comfortable life knowing that that's how I made money.
Yeah, because I mean, you've got enough. I mean, it's almost like a Forrest Gump kind of thing of being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
I mean, Kinnison, Carlin, all these people that you've come across and had, moments with them. I mean, that's, to me, it's a love, letter to comedy. Right.
Yeah. All these people that have come into my life, David Brenner, people that came and helped me, John Mendoza, Rick, Overton, and a million people who were there for me when I just happened to show up. Taylor Negron, I have stories about all these people and how they influenced me, and and how they were, Robert Schimmel, one of the greatest comics of all time, took me under his wing and had me travel with him around the world, and I really got to learn to be a better comic and a better human because of it. And I tell a lot of stories with Robert in them, and I know that a lot of people don't remember him or think of him, but the people who do remember and think of him know he's one of the greatest comics of all time. Unfortunate that he died before he could have written more or done more. Same with Carlin, same with Hicks.
But I mean, I think it can be a love letter too. I don't think
Yeah, well, that's
something.
It's a love letter.
Yeah, a love letter to comedy, to stand-up comedy. And what a journey.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, I could talk all night, but I mean, you've already been very
I can't believe
your time.
An hour and 40 minutes.
I know, and I have so much more, but I know it's like I've taken up too much of your time. I mean, and again, this is just something, like I said, it's just, I didn't plan for this. I just said yes to Joe, and then I didn't even know you were talking to Joe too. And then I saw that email with "here's my paper," and I saw Eddie. I was like, "Oh, I'd love it." And I said I'd love to talk to him, and he hooked us up, and you were like, boom, boom. So thank you. I hope maybe someday we get a chance to get some coffee in the real world somewhere in the village.
We could do that. You have my number, down in the East Village,
I'd appreciate that very much. Thank you, Eddie.
Sounds good. And where is this going to be out soon, or you could tell me that after the end of the interview or all that?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm just putting them together. I've done like 27 of them. This is like 27 or 28, and then I'm just gonna like figure out how do I put this out, where, because that's where I'm kind of lacking too, is the technical part of this. I got an app on my phone called Pay-Per-Call, and I've got this old-timey receiver, like a black handheld receiver that I plug into my iPhone so I can have that feel of like using a phone at home when you were younger talking to a friend. And then I call people up, and I just want to hear their journey and the different points throughout their life, that led them to where they are. And then kind of the shout outs of people to, because I also don't want to do something where it's, tell-alls or people, gossip. I want to hear about the good stories, the people who were angels and advocates for people.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear the other stuff. That isn't interesting. I like good gossip. I don't want to hear bad gossip.
Right.
And so it just kind of began, like I said, born out of COVID. I don't think I would have taken up the time of the people that I've talked to. And I would have tried to make it perfect. Let's meet here. I'll set up microphones, and I'll get you what do you want to eat? What kind of sandwich do you want?
Yeah.
And I just,
perfect.
I mean, for Richard Kind, I'd have to produce a sandwich anyway, but but that's Richard.
Right. Yeah, that's great. All right, well, be in touch, and you have my number, and you can text me anytime. And I'm not really traveling or going anywhere, so I'm around.
I'll take you up on that, Eddie.
All right, be well. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too, sir.
Bye-bye.
Wow. Hour and 43 minutes, Eddie Brill. I mean, the people that he has worked with that took him under his wing. Hicks, Carlin, Kinnison. I mean, to bring up Richard Pryor at the Comedy Store. And then Letterman, 17 years, working at the Ed Sullivan Theater. Again, I feel so profoundly lucky to be able to do something like this. I don't know. And again, Eddie Brill is someone I've known of, as long as I've been in New York City comedy, because like I said, I saw him at the Comedy Cellar. One night when I went there in the late 80s, we were in New York. We went there. I think Jay Moore was there. I think Eddie Brill was there that I remember. And, like I said, when Joe Lipari, asked me to interview me for his paper that he was doing, and I saw Eddie was also in the paper, I said, will you connect me with Eddie? And he did. And boom, we were talking, and we talked for, an hour and 45 minutes. So if you're still listening, I thank you. I hope you got something out of this, because I certainly did. I don't, again, know when I'm going to post these or where. I don't know when you'll be listening to this, but I hope when you do, you enjoy it and you gain some wisdom from it, because I learned so much. I mean, so much of it was just quantifiable of like, look, a late night spot is going to be, if you're a joke teller, it's going to be 14 to 16 joke. If you're a storyteller like Gaffigan, it's going to be, one story. But I hope this finds you well. I hope you're healthy. And if you're not healthy, I hope you get healthy. And once you get healthy, I hope you appreciate your health, because true wealth is health. So I will, depending on when you're listening to this, I'll say good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, or sweet dreams. If you enjoyed this, check out thepit-nyc.com. We have classes on there, online classes for now, and hopefully someday in the real world. Or you can check out my own website, alirezafaranakian.com, ALIREZAFARAHNAKIAN. That's a mouthful. If I was younger, I would change it to Ali Lee, but there's already an Ali Lee out there. But I probably would have changed it. But at this point, it is what it is, and rose by any other name. So I thank you. Hope you enjoy it. Spread the word to other people who may get a kick out of something like this, because that's basically listening and talking to someone who had front row seats to a lot of phenomenal stand-up comedy throughout the years. All right. Be well, and hope to talk to you IRL someday. Please feel free to come up and say hello. Spread the word.
Thanks for listening to Global Comedy Studios. Is this a bad time to talk? Stay tuned for more.